The planet Kareth had once been a shining jewel of the Zalari Union. Its mountains were carved with silver cities, its oceans glimmered under the light of twin suns, and its people had lived in peace for hundreds of years. Generations had grown old without ever hearing the sound of war. They thought their world would remain untouched, forever safe within the protection of their fleets and their proud alliances. But peace was fragile, and when the Zorath swarm came, it shattered like glass. At first it was only rumors, a whisper from the outer colonies, stories of strange ships devouring planets and leaving nothing but dust. The council ignored it. They told themselves the swarm was a myth, a tale meant to frighten children. But myths became truth the day the skies over Kareth burned red. The Zorath were not an army in the way the Zalari understood. They were a tide, an endless living storm of creatures grown for war. Their ships were not built but born, grotesque hives of bone and flesh that moved with terrifying hunger. They did not conquer. They consumed. Kareth's defenders fought bravely. The Zalari fleets rose into orbit, their sleek warships firing everything they had. For a brief moment, the sky was alive with light. Plasma fire tore into the swarm. Dozens of bioships burned and fell, but for every enemy destroyed, 100 more emerged from the void. The swarm pressed forward without fear, without hesitation. They were countless, endless. One by one, the Zalari ships were broken. Their mighty flagship, the Crown of Dawn, fought until its engines failed. With its last strength, it rammed into a hive ship, exploding in a final blaze that lit the heavens. For a heartbeat, the Zalari thought they might have a chance. But the swarm poured in again, drowning all hope beneath their numbers. In less than a week, the proud fleets of Kareth were gone. Cities burned, towers collapsed. Families hid underground, listening to the endless roar above. The skies belonged to the swarm. The High Council gathered in the ruins of their capital, their robes torn, their faces hollow with fear. Every ally had abandoned them. The neighboring empires would not risk their own fleets. Their closest friends had sealed their borders. And so, with no options left, the council turned to the unthinkable. They would call the humans. The name itself stirred unease among them. Humanity. The Deathworlders. The species from the blue planet on the galactic edge. To the wider galaxy, humans were half legend, half warning. They came from a world too hostile for life, a world of storms and predators and poisons. Every other race spoke of them with caution, even fear. The humans were said to be unpredictable, dangerous, and fierce beyond reason. The council hesitated. But desperation has no pride. With trembling hands, they activated the ancient beacon, a device buried for centuries in the deep vaults of their archives. Few had ever dared to use it. The beacon sent a message into the void, a desperate cry on all frequencies, a single plea repeated again and again. This is Kareth of the Zalari Union. We are under attack. The swarm devours us. We beg for aid. To whoever hears this, please, help us. The message echoed into the darkness between stars. Days passed. The people of Kareth waited. Some believed no one would answer. Others whispered that if the humans came, they might be worse than the swarm. In the shelters beneath the ruined cities, children cried themselves to sleep. Soldiers sat with empty eyes, clutching weapons they knew would not matter. Elders whispered prayers to gods that had long been silent. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. And then one night, the beacon flickered. The survivors gathered around trembling screens, afraid to hope, afraid to believe. Static hissed for a long moment, and then a voice came through, deep, steady, carrying the weight of iron. It was not the cold refusal they feared. It was not silence. This is Admiral Reeve of the Terran Fleet. We received your distress. Stand fast. You are not alone. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. And then the shelters filled with gasps, with tears, with voices crying out in shock and relief. Mothers held their children tighter. Soldiers straightened in their seats, eyes wide with something they had not felt in weeks: hope. Above them, the skies remained filled with smoke. The swarm still circled, waiting to strike again. But somewhere in the deep dark, ships were moving, ships of the Deathworlders. The Zalari did not know what would come next. They did not know if humanity's arrival meant salvation or another kind of destruction. But they knew one thing: someone had answered. And for the first time since the war began, the people of Kareth believed they might live to see the dawn. When the voice of Admiral Reeve echoed through the shelters, many Zalari thought it must be a dream. For days they had lived in fear and silence, waiting only for death, and now a promise had been spoken across the stars. You are not alone. The message repeated, steady and calm. It was a voice unlike their own, rough, deep, carrying both kindness and steel. The people of Kareth clung to it as if it were light in the endless dark. The council replayed the message again and again. Some were relieved, others fearful. The humans had answered, but what would it mean? Were they saviors? Or demons in waiting? The galaxy remembered old stories of humanity, and those stories were never gentle. The Deathworlders had been known for wars that scarred entire planets. They had faced extinction many times on their own harsh world and survived through fire and fury. No other species understood them fully. Some called them monsters. Others called them guardians. The truth was a mystery, for humans rarely left their own space, but now they were coming. Days passed, heavy with silence and expectation. The swarm continued to circle the planet, feeding on what remained of the orbiting defenses. The ground shook as they consumed wreckage and gathered their strength for the final strike. The Zalari hid powerless. They waited for either the end or the miracle that had been promised. Then the stars shifted. The first to notice were the soldiers stationed near the deep valley of Sarath. They watched the night sky through broken viewports, their eyes empty with exhaustion. And then light. A single spark in the heavens, brighter than a sun. One soldier thought it was a meteor, but then the spark grew larger, and another appeared beside it. Then another, and another. Soon the whole sky rippled with light as dozens of wormholes opened, their edges glowing blue and white. Through them came shapes. Dark, massive, silent at first, but filled with power. The humans had arrived. Their ships were not like the sleek, shining vessels of the Zalari. They were brutal, armored beasts of black steel, built not for beauty but for war. Their hulls were scarred, their edges jagged, as if each had already survived 100 battles. Yet they moved with perfect discipline, spreading into formation across the stars above Kareth. Engines burned with a steady fire. Weapons bristled along their sides. Some ships were as small as a tower, others so massive they cast shadows across the planet's surface. To the Zalari below, they looked less like ships and more like floating fortresses, walls of iron guarding the sky. The shelters erupted with cries when the people saw them. Some shouted with joy, others trembled with fear. Mothers wept as they held their children, whispering, "The humans came. They really came." Admiral Reeves' voice came again, this time carried on every frequency across the planet. "People of Kareth, this is the Terran fleet. We stand with you. We will not let the swarm take your world. Hold your shelters. Keep faith. We fight now so you may live tomorrow." His words carried no pride, no arrogance, only certainty. It was the voice of someone who had seen war before, someone who understood its weight. And though the Zalari did not know him, they believed him. But not all were at peace. In the council chamber, voices rose in argument. Some feared the humans' presence. What if they defeated the swarm only to claim Kareth for themselves? What if the price of their help was slavery? Yet others argued that such thoughts no longer mattered. The swarm would devour them within days if no one stood in their way. Humanity might be dangerous, yes, but danger had already come. At least the humans had chosen to fight for them, not against them. Above the planet, the swarm turned its countless eyes toward the new arrivals. To them, the humans were nothing but prey, another species to be consumed. Their great queen hissed through the void, sending her command, "Crush them. Break their fleet. Leave no survivors." The tide shifted. Thousands of bioships swarmed forward, blotting out the stars with their numbers. The humans did not move at first. Their ships remained still, waiting, silent, like hunters in the dark. Then with perfect timing, the human fleet advanced. Engines flared. Formations locked. Across the galaxy, species spoke of humans as reckless and wild. But here, as the fleet moved into the jaws of the swarm, there was no chaos. Only precision. Only determination. In the shelters, the Zalari listened to the rumble of distant thunder as the first volleys were fired. The sky above glowed with light, brighter than any storm they had ever seen. A young Zalari child clutched her mother's hand and whispered, "Are they really fighting for us?" Her mother looked at the burning heavens, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, little one, they are fighting for us." And for the first time in many nights, the people of Kareth dared to believe. The Deathworlders had unleashed their fleet, and hope had returned to the stars. The humans had arrived, but the swarm was not afraid. From the void, the Zorath Queen stretched her mind across her children. Millions of bioships pulsed with her command, their bodies twisting with hunger. She felt no fear, no hesitation, only the thrill of new prey. To her, the humans were another meal, another species that thought it could resist. The galaxy had seen this before. Every race had fought bravely for a time, but in the end all were consumed. Her voice echoed through the hive mind, cold and merciless. Devour them. Break their bones. Drink their worlds. And so the swarm moved. From behind Kareth's shattered moons and drifting wreckage, the tide rose. Thousands upon thousands of living ships surged forward, their wings glowing with bioluminescent fire. Their bodies were covered in jagged spines, their mouths dripping with acidic slime that corroded metal. They did not fly in neat formations. They moved like a storm, chaotic, endless, overwhelming. The Zalari hiding below felt the sky tremble. The ground shivered as if the planet itself knew what was coming. Families clutched one another tighter, praying to gods they had long abandoned. Soldiers gripped their useless rifles, watching helplessly from the bunkers. Above them, the humans stood ready. The Terran fleet did not flinch. Their ships, dark and scarred, held position as the swarm drew closer. On every bridge, human captains stood tall, eyes fixed on the storm. On every deck, soldiers waited at their stations, their voices steady as they spoke to one another over comms. Targets locked, shields holding steady, all batteries ready to fire. The humans were no strangers to fear, but they did not allow it to rule them. Their world had forged them in hardship. Storms, famine, predators, endless wars. Earth had taught them that survival was earned only through courage. And now, in the cold of space, they carried that lesson still. Admiral Reeve stood at the heart of the flagship Iron Resolve. His face was grim, his scarred hands resting on the command console. The swarm filled the horizon before him, an ocean of death pressing closer. Yet his voice was calm when he gave the order. All ships, fire. The void erupted. From the Terran fleet came light brighter than suns. Railguns thundered, hurling metal slugs at impossible speed, each impact tearing through swarm flesh. Plasma lances streaked across the darkness, slicing bioships apart with white-hot fury. Missiles spread like a storm of fireflies, their warheads detonating in waves of flame that shook the heavens. The first line of the swarm shattered instantly. Dozens of bioships exploded, their bodies breaking apart into burning fragments that rained down toward Kareth's atmosphere. The Queen screamed in rage through the hive mind, pushing her children harder. The tide pressed on, but the humans did not retreat. They advanced. The Iron Resolve led the charge, cutting into the swarm like a spear. Smaller destroyers flanked it, striking with deadly precision. Human fighters, tiny compared to the massive vessels, darted through the chaos like angry sparks. They danced between bioships, unleashing bursts of fire before vanishing again. The swarm fought back with savage fury. Acid bolts spat across the void, burning through shields. Spines launched like living torpedoes, piercing hulls. Some human ships were struck, their engines bursting in flame. Screams filled comm channels as crews fought to contain the damage. But even as ships burned, they did not fall back. One frigate, the Valiant Star, took a direct hit to its core. Its captain's voice came over the fleet's comms, steady even in death. Our fight is not over. For Kareth. For Earth. The ship turned, engines blazing one final time, and hurled itself into the center of a massive hive ship. The collision was followed by a detonation that lit the heavens, breaking the hive apart in a storm of fire. The Zalari watched from below, their eyes wide with shock. To them, the humans looked like madmen. Who would throw away their lives so willingly? Who would sacrifice entire ships just to buy time? And yet it was working. For every human ship lost, 100 swarm vessels were destroyed. The tide of the swarm faltered. For the first time, the Queen felt something she had never known before. Resistance. Her children screamed as fire consumed them. Her endless tide was being pushed back. The humans did not fight like prey. They fought like predators, like hunters who had finally found their quarry. On Kareth, in the dark shelters, a soldier whispered as he listened to the distant thunder. They're not fighting to survive. They're fighting to win. The humans pressed forward, unrelenting. Their fleet carved a path through the swarm, their weapons roaring, their engines blazing. The war for Kareth had truly begun. The battle above Kareth grew louder, brighter, and fiercer. The skies were filled with fire as the Terran fleet fought the endless swarm. But the humans had only begun to show their strength. For hours they had fought with discipline, striking with heavy weapons, holding their lines. The Zalari below thought that was all the humans could do, brave, yes, but limited. They had no idea what it truly meant when a Deathworld species unleashed itself in war. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Reeves stood with cold determination. His fleet had lost ships, crews had died, but the swarm still pressed forward. Millions of bioships remained circling, waiting to consume. The Zalari would not survive unless something changed. Reeves' voice was steady as he gave the command. All units, break formation. Hunt them! The order rippled across the fleet, and the Terran fleet obeyed. In an instant, the humans shifted from defense to attack. No longer did they hold their ground. No longer did they wait for the swarm to come to them. Now they became predators. The heavy cruisers split into packs, each diving into the swarm like wolves tearing into prey. Their cannons fired in rapid bursts, shredding enemy ships at close range. Destroyers darted in and out of the chaos, striking weak points before vanishing again. The human fighters swarmed like hornets, cutting apart the smaller bioships with merciless speed. It was not elegance. It was fury. It was survival turned into a weapon. The swarm screeched in confusion. They were used to prey fleeing, scattering, begging for mercy. But the humans charged forward even when outnumbered. One destroyer, surrounded by 20 bioships, did not try to escape. It turned into the storm, guns blazing until the enemy was nothing but burning wreckage. On the surface of Kareth, the ground trembled as fire rained from the heavens. The people in their shelters could only stare at the skies. Bright streaks of railgun fire split the night. Explosions lit the clouds red. Every blast shook their hearts, every roar of thunder carried through stone and soil. A Zalari mother held her child close, whispering through tears. They fight like no one else. They fight as if death means nothing to them. The child's wide eyes reflected the glowing sky. Are they winning, Mother? The mother's voice trembled. Yes, I think they are. Above, human ships struck deeper into the swarm's heart. Boarding craft launched, slamming into hive ships like spears. From them poured human marines, armored, relentless, eyes burning with resolve. They stormed the fleshy corridors of the hive, flamethrowers blazing, explosives tearing apart brood chambers. The queen screamed as her children died by the thousands. The Zalari had never seen anything like it. To them, war was a matter of caution, careful strikes, and retreat when odds were poor. But the humans did not retreat. They pressed forward no matter the cost. Every loss fueled their fury. Every death gave strength to the living. The council, watching through broken comms, could hardly believe what they were seeing. One elder whispered, voice shaking, "They are not fighting for themselves. They are fighting for us." Another, more cynical, answered bitterly, "Or perhaps they are fighting only because it is what they are made for. War." But even he could not hide the awe in his eyes as the humans tore into the swarm. In space, the battle reached a fever pitch. The Iron Resolve surged forward, its massive cannons glowing white with overcharged plasma. With a single broadside, it split a hive ship in half, the explosion burning low. A newborn star. Human fighters followed, chasing the fleeing fragments and cutting them down before they could regroup. The queen's rage filled the swarm. She forced her children harder, faster, hurling them at the humans in endless waves. But the humans only roared louder. One comm channel carried the voice of a human pilot laughing even as his fighter burned. For Earth. For Kareth. For the living. Then silence, followed by the burst of his ship detonating within a cluster of swarm craft, taking them all with him. The Zalari listening below wept. These Deathworlders, who they had feared for so long, were spilling their blood for a people not their own. They did not ask for surrender. They did not ask for payment. They only fought with all they had, as if the survival of Kareth was their own. And slowly the tide began to turn. The endless swarm, for the first time, faltered. Bioships pulled back, their numbers breaking under the relentless assault. Hive ships screamed as fire and steel tore through their hearts. The queen shrieked in fury, but her voice was no longer certain. For the first time in her long reign of hunger, she felt fear. And all across Kareth, in the shelters and the ruins, the Zalari whispered the same words. The Deathworlders have unleashed their fleet. And with those words came something stronger than fear, stronger than despair. Hope. The skies above Kareth were filled with fire. Human ships clashed with the endless swarm, tearing their enemies apart piece by piece. From the shelters below, it looked as if two suns were being born and dying again and again. The ground shook with each explosion, and the air carried the distant thunder of war. For the Zalari, it was hope and terror woven together. They had never seen such courage. They had never seen such madness. The humans fought as if death meant nothing, as if every life was already promised to the cause of victory. But courage has a price, and soon the Zalari began to understand just how heavy that price was. On the fleet's outer edge, the destroyer Silver Flame was surrounded. Swarm ships latched onto its hull like leeches, burning through its armor with acid claws. The captain knew they would never break free. His voice came over the fleet's comms, calm and steady even as his ship screamed with fire. "We cannot hold. Engines failing. To all units, remember us well. Flame out." And then the Silver Flame turned its nose toward a hive ship. Its engines roared one last time, carrying it forward in a final charge. The impact shattered both vessels in a burst of fire so bright it lit half the planet's sky. Inside the shelters, the Zalari gasped. Some cried in horror, others whispered prayers. The humans had destroyed themselves without hesitation, and yet they had taken a piece of the swarm with them. Minutes later, another tragedy struck. The frigate Gallant Dawn was torn open, its decks ripped apart by living spines hurled from enemy ships. Fires spread through the corridors, and the crew fought desperately to save themselves. But instead of calling for retreat, the captain sent his last order. "Send all data to the fleet. Every weak point we found. Let them finish what we could not." The transmission carried across the void, and then the Gallant Dawn was gone, consumed in a silent explosion that left only wreckage drifting in the dark. Admiral Reeve stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, watching the markers vanish from his display. One by one, ships were falling. His jaw tightened, but his voice never broke. They did their duty. Now we do ours. Forward. The human fleet pressed on. For every ship they lost, 10 swarm vessels fell. Yet the cost was terrible. Voices cried out across the comms, some in pain, some in defiance, some simply saying goodbye. Every death was felt across the fleet, and every survivor carried the weight of it. On the ground, the Zalari listened. Many wept openly. They could hear the humans giving their lives, not for their own world, not for their own children, but for Kareth. For strangers, for a people they had never met. A young Zalari soldier whispered in disbelief, "They die for us. Why would they do that?" An elder beside him, voice heavy with sorrow, answered, "Because that is what it means to be human, to stand even when the night is darkest, to fight even when hope is gone." In the void, the humans showed no weakness. Even as hulls cracked and engines burned, they fought harder. Boarding parties stormed hive ships, knowing most would never return. Pilots dove straight into the jaws of death, turning their fighters into weapons when their ammunition ran dry. The swarm, for the first time in memory, began to hesitate. The queen hissed in fury, but her children wavered under the unending storm of fire. She had never seen prey like this. She had never felt the sting of such resistance. But for the humans, victory was not without pain. The fleet was smaller now. Every ship lost was a wound to their heart. Every sacrifice left a silence that could never be filled. In the shelters below, silence fell as the comms crackled with a final message from a dying human officer. "If we fall, remember us. Tell your children we fought for them. Tell them humanity stood with you." The message ended with static, but the words echoed in every Zalari's heart. Tears fell freely. Families held each other close. And in that moment, the people of Kareth swore they would never forget. Above them, the battle raged on. The humans, though bloodied, still stood. Their fleet burned, their losses grew heavy, but their resolve did not break. If anything, it grew stronger with every sacrifice. Admiral Reeve gave the order once more, his voice like iron. "All ships, push. We hold nothing back. For those we lost, for those who live, push them into the dark." And the Terran fleet roared in answer. Engines ignited. Weapons blazed. Humanity threw itself deeper into the storm, carrying the memory of their fallen as fire in their hearts. The cost of war was heavy, but the humans bore it willingly. Because for them, the lives of strangers were worth their blood, and as the Zalari watched in awe and grief, they began to understand. The humans were not only Deathworlders, they were guardians. The fires of war still burned above Kareth, but something was changing. The swarm, once endless and unstoppable, began to falter. Their strikes grew slower, their formation broke apart, and for the first time in living memory, the galaxy's greatest terror seemed afraid. The humans had become a storm that could not be contained. Though bloodied and broken, their spirit blazed brighter with every loss. Where another fleet would have retreated, the Terrans pressed harder. Where others would have surrendered, they fought until their last breath. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Reeves' eyes burned with iron will. Around him, his crew worked with a calm that came only from trust. They had lost friends. They had lost ships, yet no one faltered. Focus fire on their hive ship clusters, Reeve commanded. Break their heart and the body will die. The order spread like lightning. Human cruisers turned their cannons, unleashing waves of plasma and kinetic fire. Swarm vessels shattered under the assault, their burning hulks drifting into the void. Still the humans pressed forward, cutting through the chaos like a blade through flesh. For the Zalari watching below, it was like witnessing legends come to life. They had always believed the swarm to be eternal, a curse of the stars that no power could defeat. Yet here were the humans, ordinary flesh and blood, forcing the monsters to bend. In the shelters, families huddled close, listening to the comms. The cries of battle, the orders shouted in human voices, and the screams of dying ships filled the air. But amidst the terror there was hope. Hope carried on every word, every sacrifice. One Zalari child whispered to his mother, "Will the humans win?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the sky. "They already have, my child. Even if they fall, they have shown us that the swarm can bleed." Meanwhile, in the void, the Swarm Queen screeched in fury. Her command pulses echoed through her hive, but her children hesitated. The humans fought like predators, and their ferocity spread fear even into the Queen's collective mind. For the first time, she felt the sting of doubt. The humans did not let up. Fighters dove into enemy lines, weaving through impossible odds. Some were torn apart, but others struck deep, firing into the soft, glowing cores of swarm vessels. One pilot, his fighter aflame, shouted into the comms, "For Earth! For Karith!" before driving himself straight into an enemy cruiser. The explosion shattered the swarm's formation, opening the path for human battleships to advance. Every sacrifice carved a way forward. Every loss turned into fuel for vengeance. Admiral Reeve clenched his fist. "They bleed. Push harder. Do not give them room to breathe." The Terran fleet moved as one, striking again and again. Hive ships began to fall, their monstrous bodies breaking apart. The swarm's dark tide grew weaker with every passing minute. On the ground, Zalari soldiers looked up with wide eyes. Some had lost all hope only days ago, believing their people would be consumed like so many others. Now, watching the sky burn with human fire, their hearts filled with something new, strength. "If they can fight," one Zalari soldier whispered, gripping his weapon tight, "then so can we." And for the first time, Zalari forces rallied. Their scattered resistance, inspired by the humans, turned into firestorms on the ground. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Back in orbit, the humans pressed their advantage. The Iron Resolve fired its main cannon, a beam of raw energy that pierced a hive ship clean through. The Swarm Queen shrieked in rage as her children's cries filled her mind. The humans were not prey, they were hunters. But even as victory edged closer, the humans carried their grief. Every time a ship marker disappeared from the displays, silence filled the bridge. Every loss was remembered, honored, and carried forward. They fought not only to survive, but to make sure those sacrifices were not in vain. Finally, the moment came. The swarm lines broke, ships scattered, fleeing from the humans' wrath. The Queen's furious calls could not hold them together. Panic spread through the hive mind. For the first time in history, the swarm retreated. Admiral Reeve stood tall, his voice carrying across the fleet. "Do not give them mercy. Drive them back. Let the stars remember that humanity does not bow." The fleet surged forward one last time, cutting into the retreating swarm, scattering them across the void. Explosions lit the darkness, each one a step closer to survival. Each one proof that Deathworlders could bend the galaxy's nightmares. In the shelters below, the Zalari heard the comms burst with victory cries. Cheers filled the caverns, tears of joy mixing with grief. Families embraced. Soldiers shouted in triumph, and for the first time in centuries, the people of Karith felt freedom in their hearts. Above, the battle ended. Silence returned to the void, broken only by the crackle of fires and the drifting remains of ships. The humans had won, but the cost was carved into their souls. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Reeve lowered his head. Around him, his crew stood in quiet respect. They had broken the swarm, but they carried the weight of every life lost. And yet, deep within that silence, there was pride. They had stood where others would have fallen. They had shown the galaxy that even against the endless dark, humanity would never yield. The tide had turned. The swarm had bled, and the legend of humanity had only just begun. The battle was over, but the scars remained. Above Kareth, the void was filled with the wreckage of ships, twisted steel, broken hulls, and drifting fragments of both human and swarm vessels. Fire still burned on the surface of the planet, smoke rising from cities that had once gleamed like silver. The war had left its mark on everything. Yet in the silence after the storm, a fragile peace began to grow. The Zalari people crawled out from their shelters, blinking under the pale light of their twin suns. For weeks they had lived underground, waiting for death. Now they stepped into the open air, and for the first time they saw no swarm blotting out the sky. Instead, they saw human ships holding their orbit. Scarred, battered, but standing watch like guardians. Children pointed upward with wide eyes. Elders fell to their knees, whispering thanks to their ancestors. Soldiers lowered their weapons and wept openly. Kareth was wounded, but Kareth was alive. In the capital, what was left of the High Council gathered. Their once proud hall was broken, its shining pillars cracked, but they stood together beneath its ruins. They prepared words of thanks for their saviors, though their voices trembled with both awe and fear, for they knew what had been unleashed. Humanity was no ordinary ally. A meeting was arranged aboard the Iron Resolve. The council, dressed in torn robes, walked through the steel corridors of the Terran flagship. Everywhere they looked, they saw humans, some with bandages, some limping, yet all standing with a strength that unsettled them. These were not fragile beings. They were forged in fire, and their very presence carried weight. Admiral Reeve waited for them in the command chamber. His uniform was torn, his face marked with exhaustion, but his eyes burned steady. He rose when the Zalari entered, and for a long moment silence filled the room. Finally, the eldest counselor spoke. His voice shook with emotion. Admiral Reeve, on behalf of Kareth, on behalf of the Zalari people, we thank you. Without the Terran fleet, we would be ash beneath the swarm. You have given us back our world. Reeve nodded slowly. Your world was worth saving. Every world is. But understand this. Victory did not come without cost. Thousands of my people now drift in that void. They gave their lives so yours could continue. The counselors lowered their heads, shame burning in their hearts. They had feared the humans, even whispered that they were monsters. Yet it was these so-called monsters who had bled for them. One counselor whispered, "Why? Why fight for us when so many others turned away?" Reeve's gaze grew distant as if he looked back across the stars to his homeworld. Because we know what it is to face extinction. Humanity has lived with death since the first fire we lit. Our world taught us that survival is not given. It is earned, every day. When we saw your plea, we heard more than words. We heard ourselves, and we will never turn away from that call. The chamber was silent. The words sank deep, heavier than any weapon. From that day, the Zalari no longer looked at humanity with fear. They looked with respect. Stories spread across Kareth. Tales of human pilots who fought to the last breath. Soldiers who shielded Zalari children with their own bodies. Engineers who gave their rations so others could live. These stories became seeds of legend, carried in every home, every hearth. But humanity did not linger to bask in glory. The Terran fleet moved tirelessly to aid the survivors, delivering supplies, helping rebuild broken cities, and burying the dead with honor. Their engineers worked alongside Zalari workers. Their doctors treated alien wounds as carefully as human ones. And when the Memorial Day came, humans and Zalari stood together under the same sky. A great stone monument was raised on the hills above the capital. Carved into it were two words in both Terran and Zalari script, "Never alone." Admiral Reeve stood before the crowd, his voice carried by the winds. The swarm was not the end. They will rise again somewhere someday, but when they do, let this stand as a promise. Humanity will not stand by while darkness spreads. We will fight, not for conquest, not for glory, but because life deserves to endure. Cheers erupted. tears flowing freely among both species. In that moment, the line between human and Zalari blurred. They were not strangers. They were survivors together. That night, when the stars returned to their calm glow, the Zalari children pointed up and whispered to one another, "Those are the humans, the Deathworlders," the ones who answered. And across the galaxy, the story of Kareth began to spread. Races who had once mocked humanity's savagery now spoke their name with respect. The swarm, once feared as unstoppable, had been broken, and the world knew why. Because when the galaxy pleaded for help, it was the Deathworlders who answered. Because when the night was darkest, it was humanity who lit the fire. And because in the end, when all hope was lost, it was the Deathworlders' fleet that rose like thunder from the void. The dawn after darkness belonged to both Kareth and Earth. Together, they proved a truth that would echo across the stars for generations to come. Humanity was not the terror of the galaxy. Humanity was its shield.